Look at this one. Probably learned chess on a board drawn in the dirt with sticks. The billionaire's laughter echoed through the Grand Lumiere ballroom as cameras zoomed in on 12-year-old Emily Mercer. Barefoot, wearing a faded dress that hung like shame, clutching a wooden chess set with pieces so worn the Black Queen had lost part of her crown. "I'll give her 10 moves before she resigns," Alexander Sutherland announced to the audience of millionaires who'd paid $5,000 per seat to watch this spectacle. Why waste a future on someone who clearly has no talent? The crowd chuckled nervously. This was the first annual Adoption Chess Challenge, a televised event where orphaned children played chess against billionaire adopters, turning human lives into trophies for public approval. Win the game in dominant fashion, earn the right to adopt the child. Sutherland, tech mogul, rated 2,100 chess player, destroyer of amateurs in high-stakes exhibitions, had deliberately chosen the poorest-looking girl on stage specifically to humiliate her for viral clips. He thought it would be easy. He had no idea what he'd just unleashed. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now? I love knowing our ducal family spans the globe. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because this story has a twist that will leave you breathless, and you won't want to miss a single word. Emily stood on marble that felt colder than any street she'd ever slept on, the spotlight burning like judgment against her dirt-smudged cheeks. The ballroom glittered with obscene wealth, crystal chandeliers, burgundy silk walls, women in gowns worth more than entire orphanages. 10 children stood in a nervous line, each paired with a gleaming chess table. Some wore donated clothes that almost fit. Emily wore exactly what she'd arrived in, the truth of her circumstances displayed like a price tag the cameras could zoom in on. She didn't belong here. None of them did. But when Sutherland had pointed at her with that smug smile, when he'd made his cruel prediction to entertain the crowd, something cold and focused had crystallized in her chest. Not anger, something purer. Determination. She'd survived 5 years at the Augustine Home for Children, a crumbling building where 42 kids shared 12 beds and hope was rationed more carefully than food. She'd taught herself chess from a water-damaged book found in a trash heap, analyzing positions by candlelight while her siblings slept. She'd played 3,000 games against street hustlers twice her age, losing and learning and refusing to quit until she understood not just the moves but the language of the board. She was 12 years old, and she'd never had the luxury of underestimating anyone. But Alexander Sutherland, brilliant, wealthy, untouchable Alexander Sutherland, had just made the fatal mistake of underestimating her. "Then I guess we should start," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The cameras loved it. Barefoot girl versus billionaire in a perfect suit, poverty versus privilege, desperation versus arrogance. But as Emily took her seat and touched the cool glass of the electronic board, as the clock began its merciless countdown, she knew something these cameras would never capture. This wasn't going to be the story they expected. This was going to be the story that changed everything. The game began. He opened aggressively e4, sacrificing development for speed, expecting her to crumble under pressure. She responded with precision e5, matching him move for move. 10 moves passed. His smirk began to fade. 20 moves. Sweat appeared on his temples. 30 moves. The position was equal. And in the commentary booth, Grandmaster Claire Pemberton leaned into her microphone and whispered the words that would make headlines. "Oh my God, she's not just surviving. She's winning." But could a barefoot girl with a wooden chess set really defeat a billionaire who'd never lost on this stage? And what would her victory cost her in a world where the poor aren't supposed to embarrass the powerful? The clock started with a soft electronic beep that felt louder than it should. Emily's hand hovered over the pieces for precisely 3 seconds. Not from hesitation, but from ritual. She'd learned long ago that chess wasn't just about the moves you made, but about the breath you took before making them. Control began in stillness. She pushed her king's pawn forward 2 squares, the most common opening in chess history. Simple. Classical. Revealing nothing. Across the board, Alexander Sutherland mirrored her move without pause, leaning back in his chair with the casual ease of someone settling in to enjoy a show he'd already seen the ending to. "Nervous?" he asked, loud enough for the front row to hear. Emily didn't answer. She moved her knight forward, her movements economical and precise. The wooden set she'd brought sat beside the electronic board like a talisman. Her real teacher, her silent companion through countless nights when hunger kept her awake in chess, was the only thing that made sense. The board had been her escape from the Augustine Home for Children, a crumbling 3-story building on the east side of the city where 42 kids shared 12 beds and hope was rationed more carefully than food. Sister Margaret ran the place with exhausted kindness, doing her best with donations that never quite covered the month. There were good days when someone donated books or when the heat actually worked. And there were bad days when social workers arrived with forms to take the youngest children away to better situations that sometimes were and sometimes weren't. Emily had been there since she was 7, since the car accident that took her parents and left her with nothing but fragmented memories and a younger brother named Thomas who'd been separated from her within weeks. She'd stopped asking about him after the first year. The answers hurt too much. Chess had found her during the second winter, when she discovered a water-damaged book in a donation bin. She'd taught herself to read the strange notation by candlelight, analyzing positions while the other children slept, moving imaginary pieces across imaginary squares until the patterns burned themselves into her mind. By 9, she was beating the older kids at the home. By 10, she was taking on street players in the park 3 blocks away, winning enough quarters to buy bread when the home's pantry ran empty. By 11, she'd played over 3,000 games. Most losses at first, then draws, then slow, hard-earned victories against opponents who'd been playing since before she was born. She had no coach, no computer, no formal training, just hunger for the game, for mastery, for something that was entirely hers. Sutherland made his next move with theatrical flair, his expensive watch catching the light. He glanced toward the commentary booth where 2 grandmasters sat analyzing the game for the live stream. "What do you think, gentlemen? How long until she cracks?" Grandmaster Victor Molina, a legendary player in his 60s with kind eyes and a soft Russian accent, spoke carefully into his microphone. "It's too early to predict. She's playing solid moves." "Solid boring, you mean?" Sutherland laughed, loud enough to draw chuckles from the audience. He turned back to Emily. "Tell me, darling, who taught you? Some park player? A YouTube video?" Emily moved her bishop, placing it where it aimed toward his king's side of the board. "Books," she said simply, her voice barely carrying over the ambient noise. "I taught myself." Something flickered in Sutherland's expression, not quite respect, but perhaps a flicker of curiosity. Then it vanished beneath his showman's mask. "Books? How quaint. I had grandmaster training from age 8. Private coaches. Computer analysis. Tell me, did your books teach you what's about to happen?" He moved his king to safety behind a wall of pawns with a flourish. Emily studied the position. Her heart beat steady and slow. The noise of the ballroom, the whispers, the camera shutters, the ambient rustle of expensive fabric, faded to nothing. There was only the board, only the eternal conversation between pieces and possibilities. She saw what he expected her to do: castle her king to the same side, play it safe, follow the standard pattern. Instead, she castled in the opposite direction. The move landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through the audience. It was riskier, more aggressive. It announced that she wasn't here to survive. She was here to fight. For the first time, Sutherland's smile tightened. "Interesting choice," he murmured, leaning forward now, reassessing. In the commentary booth, Grandmaster Molina exchanged a glance with his co-commentator, Grandmaster Claire Pemberton, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd won the world championship twice. "Did you see that?" Molina said softly, That's not the move of a beginner. No, Pemberton agreed, her gaze fixed on the board. That's the move of someone who understands risk. She's not trying to play it safe. She's playing to win. On stage, the game accelerated. Sutherland pushed his pawns forward, beginning his attack. Emily countered with her own advances, cracking open pathways toward his king. Pieces flowed across the board, knights leaping, bishops cutting diagonals, rooks sliding into powerful positions. The audience's laughter had stopped. The cameras zoomed tighter. Even the servers pausing between tables with champagne trays had stopped to watch. Because something impossible was happening. The barefoot girl in the faded dress wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. Every one of Sutherland's attacks met a precise defense. Every threat she created forced him to pause, to calculate, to spend precious clock time on positions that should have been simple. His advantage wasn't materializing. The quick victory he'd promised wasn't coming. Sweat gleamed on his temples beneath the lights. His hands had stopped moving with casual confidence and started calculating with desperate precision. And Emily, small, quiet, unassuming Emily, sat perfectly still across from him, her worn wooden pieces beside her like witnesses to a truth the world was only beginning to understand. Genius didn't need privilege. It only needed a chance. The position on the board was no longer one-sided. It was equal, perfectly, impossibly equal. A 12-year-old girl with no training was matching a billionaire move for move, thought for thought, strategy for strategy. In the audience, whispers spread like wildfire. Is he actually struggling? Against a child? Look at his face, he's rattled. Sutherland reached for a piece, hesitated, pulled his hand back. The clock ticked mercilessly. His time advantage was evaporating while she played faster, surer, with the confidence of someone who'd already survived worse than this. She'd learned to embrace pressure the way other children learned to fear it. Because when losing meant going hungry, when mistakes meant consequences, when weakness meant survival became impossible, you learned to play every game like your life depended on it. And sometimes it did. But how long could she sustain this impossible fight? And what would happen when the billionaire realized he wasn't just losing the game? He was losing his reputation in front of the entire world. Move 38 changed everything. Emily's rook slid across the board with a soft tap, RC2, sliding into Sutherland's second rank like a blade between ribs. The move looked quiet, almost passive, but its implications rippled through the position like shock waves through deep water. In the commentary booth, Claire Pemberton inhaled sharply. "Oh my God!" Victor Molina leaned closer to the analysis board. "She's not just defending anymore. She's infiltrating." Sutherland stared at the rook as if it had personally betrayed him. His advantage, the one he'd built through careful, aggressive play, was evaporating. The position wasn't winning anymore. It wasn't even clearly better. It was equal. And for a man who'd made his reputation on dominance, equal felt like losing. He reached for his queen, hesitated, pulled his hand back. The clock ticked mercilessly. 5 minutes remaining on his time, 8 on hers. She'd been playing faster, surer, while he'd burned minutes searching for the crushing blow that refused to materialize. The cameras captured every micro-expression. The furrow between his brows, the tightness around his mouth, the way his fingers drummed against the table edge in a rhythm that betrayed fracturing composure. In the audience, whispers spread like wildfire. Is he struggling? Against a child? Look at her face. She's not even nervous. Emily wasn't nervous because she'd lived this moment 1,000 times before. Not on stages like this, but in parks where losing meant going hungry, in alleyways where street players bet money she couldn't afford to lose, in the dark hours of the Augustine home when she'd played entire games against herself to understand where her thinking had failed. She'd learned to embrace pressure the way other children learned to fear it. Sutherland finally moved, QE2, defending his second rank and trying to trade pieces to simplify the position. It was the move of someone looking for safety, not victory. The move of someone who'd realized too late that the prey he'd chosen had teeth. Emily responded instantly. Knight to d4. The piece landed in the center of the board like a declaration of war, forking his queen and threatening to invade further. The position exploded with tactical possibilities. Lines branching into lines, calculations spiraling into complexity that favored the player who could see deeper, think faster, hold more patterns in their mind simultaneously. Beautiful, Molina whispered into his microphone, loud enough for the stream's 200,000 viewers to hear. That knight is a monster. Look at the control. She's strangling him. Claire Pemberton was already analyzing the variations, her fingers flying across her demonstration board. If he takes the knight, she recaptures with the bishop and her rook penetrates to the 7th rank. If he moves the queen, the knight jumps to f3 and his king is in serious danger. He's in a tactical cage of his own making. On stage, Sutherland's jaw clenched. For minutes on his clock. The audience had gone completely silent now, the earlier laughter replaced by something electric and uncomfortable, the collective realization that they were witnessing something none of them had paid to see. A billionaire losing, to a barefoot child, on live television. He moved his queen to f3, attacking her knight and trying to maintain some semblance of coordination. But his hand trembled slightly as he pressed the clock, and Emily saw it. That tiny fracture in his armor, that first hairline crack in the facade of invincibility. She'd seen it before in the Park Hustlers when they realized she wasn't the easy mark they'd assumed. She'd seen it in the older kids at the home when she'd beaten them 3 games in a row. She'd seen it in her own reflection during the first year after her parents died, when the world revealed itself as something crueler and colder than she'd ever imagined. Fear looked the same on every face, regardless of how much money sat in the bank account behind it. Emily exchanged knights, simplifying the position just enough to clarify her advantage. Her rook still dominated the 2nd rank. Her bishop aimed at his king like a loaded weapon. Her pawns stood like soldiers ready to march. Move 42. Move 43. Move 44. The game had transformed from an exhibition into an execution. Slow, methodical, unavoidable. Sutherland fought for every square, sacrificed pawns to create counterplay, tried desperately to complicate positions that refused to save him. But Emily had learned chess in environments where mistakes meant consequences, where carelessness meant hunger, where weakness meant survival became impossible. She played with the cold precision of someone who'd never had the luxury of assuming tomorrow would be kind. 3 minutes left on Sutherland's clock, 7 on hers. The commentators had stopped trying to maintain neutrality. "This is remarkable," Pemberton said, her voice tinged with something between disbelief and awe. "She's playing at a level far beyond her rating, far beyond what anyone expected. This is genius," Molina interrupted softly.
"Pure, un refined, devastating genius.
The kind you can't teach. The kind that just exists." In the front row, a woman in a diamond necklace leaned toward her companion and whispered loudly enough for nearby microphones to catch. "My God, Harrison, he's actually going to lose." Sutherland heard it. Everyone heard it. His face flushed crimson beneath the lights, humiliation and rage warring for dominance in his expression. He'd come here to cement his reputation, to adopt a child as a trophy for his legacy, to demonstrate once again that wealth and privilege naturally correlated with superiority. Instead, he was being systematically dismantled by a 12-year-old girl whose entire net worth probably fit in his jacket pocket. He pushed a pawn forward, a desperate attempt at a passed pawn, at something that might salvage complications from the wreckage of his position. Emily's hand hovered over her pieces for 3 seconds. Then she moved her bishop to e4, cutting off his pawn's advance and simultaneously threatening a devastating checkmate pattern in 5 moves. Sutherland saw it immediately. His face went pale. 2 minutes 30 seconds on his clock. The position was lost. Objectively, mathematically, undeniably lost. But surrendering meant admitting defeat in front of millions. Meant confirming that the barefoot girl he'd mocked had beaten him fairly. Meant the end of his reputation as the brilliant billionaire who conquered challenges through natural superiority. So he didn't resign. He played on, moving pieces with mechanical desperation, hoping for a miracle that every grandmaster in the world knew wasn't coming. And Emily, small, quiet, patient Emily, tightened the noose with the calm inevitability of someone who'd always known this moment would arrive, who'd prepared for it through thousands of games played in darkness, who'd survived too much to be intimidated by spotlights. Move 47 approached like destiny, walking slowly down a narrow hallway. But what would Sutherland do when the final blow came? Would he accept defeat with grace? Or would his humiliation transform into something far more dangerous? Move 47 arrived with the weight of judgment. Emily's knight slid to f5, a quiet maneuver that looked almost gentle, but Victor Molina's sharp intake of breath told the real story. The knight controlled 7 critical squares simultaneously, cut off Sutherland's last defensive resources, and prepared a final mating net that even amateur players could see forming. "It's over," Claire Pemberton said into her microphone, her voice carrying equal parts admiration and disbelief. "There's no defense. She's found the killing sequence." Sutherland's hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles went white. 1 minute 40 seconds remained on his clock. His king stood exposed, his pieces scattered and uncoordinated, his entire position a testament to how completely he'd been outplayed. But instead of resigning, instead of offering his hand across the board with the dignity expected from a man of his stature, something darker flickered across his features. "Pride wounded becomes dangerous. You know what I think?" he said suddenly, loud enough to carry across the stage, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "I think someone coached you. There's no way a street urchin with a wooden chess set plays like this without help." The accusation landed like a grenade in the hushed ballroom. Emily's head snapped up, her eyes meeting his for the first time since move 30. "What? You heard me." Sutherland leaned back in his chair, performance mode sliding over humiliation like armor over a wound. "This whole thing is staged. Someone taught you this line, fed you these moves. You're not really playing, you're reciting." Gasps rippled through the audience. The cameras zoomed closer, hungry for drama. Emily felt ice flood her veins, not fear, but something colder. Rage crystallized into diamond-hard clarity. She'd survived 5 years of social workers doubting her, teachers underestimating her, other children mocking the way she clutched her wooden pieces like lifelines. She'd endured poverty, separation, loss, and every flavor of dismissal the world could offer. But this, having her victory stolen by accusation, having her genius questioned simply because it wore the wrong clothes, this was a violation deeper than any move on a chessboard. "I taught myself," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "From books, from playing, from analyzing every mistake I ever made until I understood why it failed." "Convenient story," Sutherland shot back. "But I've played chess for 30 years. I've studied with grandmasters. And I'm supposed to believe a 12-year-old orphan just happened to develop skills that rival titled players? No. Someone put you up to this. Probably the same people who organized this circus to embarrass wealthy donors." The host stepped forward, his professional smile strained. "Mr. Sutherland, perhaps we should check her." Sutherland pointed at Emily with barely concealed contempt. "Check her pockets. Check that ridiculous wooden set. I guarantee you'll find notes, or an earpiece or something." The suggestion hung in the air like poison. Claire Pemberton removed her headset and stood abruptly in the commentary booth. "This is outrageous," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I've been analyzing this game move by move. Every decision she's made shows deep positional understanding, tactical awareness, and original thought. You can't memorize your way through a position this complex. You have to understand it. Then let her prove it, Sutherland snapped. Reset the board. Play me again. If she's really this good, she'll beat me twice. Victor Molina's voice came through the speakers, grave and disappointed. Mr. Sutherland, you have a losing position on the board right now. The honorable action is to resign and acknowledge your opponent's superior play. I acknowledge nothing until I know this isn't fraud. The ballroom erupted into competing voices, some defending Emily, others murmuring agreement with Sutherland's suspicions, most simply stunned by the spectacular implosion of what was supposed to be a heartwarming charity event. Emily sat frozen in her chair, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes dissecting her, judging her, doubting her. The cameras captured every angle. The dirt on her bare feet, the worn hem of her dress, the chipped pieces of her wooden set. Evidence, in their lenses, that someone like her couldn't possibly possess something as valuable as genius. Then she felt it. A small, solid weight against her chest beneath the thin fabric of her dress. The silver locket she'd worn since her parents died. The one containing a photo so faded, she could barely make out their faces anymore. The one reminder that she'd once been someone's daughter, someone's treasure, someone worth protecting. They'd believed in her before the world taught her not to believe in herself. She stood slowly, the screech of her chair against marble cutting through the noise. You want proof? Her voice started quiet but gained strength with each word, filling the space until the arguing stopped and everyone turned to listen. Fine. Clear the board. We'll play again. But this time I want conditions. Sutherland's eyebrows rose. You're in no position to negotiate, little girl. Then you're afraid, Emily said simply, and watched his face flush darker. Afraid that you'll lose again and won't be able to blame anyone but yourself. The challenge struck its target. Sutherland's ego, already bruised, already defensive, couldn't resist. Name your conditions, he said through clenched teeth. Emily's mind raced, calculating not chess moves now but life moves, opportunity moves, the kind of strategy that existed beyond 64 squares. She thought of Thomas, her brother, lost somewhere in the system. She thought of Sister Margaret at the Augustine home, struggling to feed 42 children on donations that never stretched far enough. She thought of every kid like her who'd ever been dismissed because poverty somehow equaled worthlessness in the eyes of people who'd never missed a meal. If I win the second game, she said clearly, you don't adopt me. Instead, you donate $1 million to the Augustine Home for Children, enough to keep it running for 5 years. Enough to make sure no child there goes hungry again. The audience gasped. Even the cameras seemed to pause. And if you win? Sutherland asked, sensing a trap but unable to see it. Emily's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. If you win, I'll apologize on camera for wasting everyone's time, admit I had help, and you can walk away with your reputation intact. She was betting everything, her dignity, her truth, her future, on a game she'd already proven she could win. But proof given once is never enough for people determined not to believe. Would Sutherland accept her impossible wager? And what secret weapon did Emily have left to deploy against a man who'd rather destroy her than admit defeat? Sutherland stared at her for 5 long seconds, his expression cycling through disbelief, calculation, and finally arrogance reborn. $1 million was pocket change to him, less than he'd spend on a single art acquisition. But the chance to publicly humiliate this girl who dared embarrass him, to force a confession of fraud from her own lips on camera, that was priceless. Deal, he said, extending his hand across the table with theatrical magnanimity. Let's see if lightning strikes twice. Emily shook his hand. His grip was cold, designed to intimidate, and felt the entire trajectory of her life balance on the edge of the next hour. The stage crew reset the board while the audience buzzed with electric anticipation. Social media had already exploded. the live stream climbing past 500,000 viewers, hashtags trending. Think pieces being drafted in real time about privilege, talent, and what this moment meant for a society that constantly confused wealth with worth. Claire Pemberton returned to the commentary booth, her expression troubled but fascinated. I've never seen anything like this in 40 years of chess. A rematch under duress, life-changing stakes, a child betting her dignity against a billionaire's ego. The question, Victor Molina said quietly, is whether she can handle the pressure. The first game, she had nothing to lose. Now, everything rides on this. On stage, Emily settled back into her chair, her bare feet dangling above the floor. She noticed details now that adrenaline had sharpened her senses. The way the spotlight created a circle of heat around the table, the faint smell of expensive perfume from the front row, the rhythmic click of camera shutters like mechanical heartbeats. Sutherland cracked his knuckles, rolled his shoulders, transformed himself back into the confident predator who'd opened the evening. Your move, sweetheart. Try not to disappoint. Emily pushed her queen's pawn forward 2 squares. D4. A different opening this time, more solid, more classical, the kind of foundation that revealed her versatility. She wasn't a one-trick player who'd memorized a single line. She understood chess in all its infinite variations. Sutherland responded with D5, immediately challenging the center. The game began to flow, moves coming faster now. Both players passed the psychological warfare and into pure competition. Knight to F3, knight to F6, pawn to C4, pawn to E6. The queen's gambit declined. Respectable, solid. The kind of opening that led to long, strategic battles where understanding mattered more than tactics. 10 moves passed. 15. 20. The position remained balanced, pieces developing harmoniously on both sides. But Emily was playing faster now, spending less time per move while Sutherland still burned minutes calculating, double-checking, searching for the traps he was convinced existed. On move 23, she offered a pawn sacrifice, pushing her e-pawn forward to e5, allowing him to capture it if he dared. Sutherland studied the position for 3 full minutes. The sacrifice looked suspicious, too generous, like bait in a trap he couldn't quite see. But declining it meant admitting fear, meant ceding initiative to a child he'd already accused of fraud. His hand hovered over the board. Then he took the pawn. Emily's response came within 5 seconds, knight to g4, attacking his bishop and threatening to invade on f2. The position exploded with tactical complexity, pieces suddenly coordinating in ways that transformed the board from balanced to dangerous. "Oh no," Claire Pemberton whispered. "He's walked into it." "Into what?" the host asked from beside the commentary desk, speaking for the confused audience. "She's sacrificed material for an attack. Look at her pieces, the knight on g4, the bishop aimed at his king, the queen ready to swing into the assault. She's not playing for a draw or a slow grind. She's going for his throat." Sutherland saw it too. Saw the storm gathering on the kingside, saw his king suddenly feeling vulnerable behind pawns that no longer seemed adequate. He castled queenside, trying to escape the danger zone, but Emily's pieces followed like hounds tracking wounded prey. Move 28, move 30, move 33. The attack intensified, sacrifices piling on sacrifices, material exchanged for tempo, pieces hurled at his king position with the controlled violence of someone who understood exactly how much force was necessary and where to apply it. Sutherland's time advantage evaporated. For minutes on his clock, 6 on hers. His earlier confidence had transformed into grim determination, then visible stress, then something approaching desperation. The audience watched in stunned silence as history repeated itself. The billionaire outplayed, outmaneuvered, outclassed by the barefoot girl who'd learned chess from trash heap books and street corner battles. On move 37, Emily delivered the decisive blow. A quiet rook lift that created an unstoppable mating attack. 3 moves remained before checkmate, and every grandmaster watching knew there was no defense. Sutherland stared at the board, his face cycling through denial, rage, and finally, grudging, bitter acceptance. He tipped his king over with a sharp click that echoed through the silent ballroom. Resignation. The room exploded. Half the audience erupted in applause, cheering for the underdog victory they'd witnessed. The other half sat frozen, struggling to process the complete inversion of every assumption they'd brought into the evening. The cameras captured it all. Sutherland's humiliation, Emily's quiet dignity, the moment a child proved that genius didn't require permission from the wealthy to exist. But Emily didn't celebrate. She simply stood, looked directly at the nearest camera, and spoke words that would be replayed millions of times across every platform. I didn't need your pity or your money. I just needed 10 minutes and a board to show you what you couldn't see. That talent doesn't grow only in mansions. It grows anywhere someone refuses to give up. Then she turned to Sutherland, her voice dropping to something only he could hear. $1 million. For the Augustine home. Tonight. His jaw clenched, but he nodded, trapped by his own public wager, witnessed by 500,000 viewers who'd hold him accountable. Emily picked up her worn wooden chess set, tucked it under her arm, and walked toward the stage exit with her head high and her bare feet silent against the marble. Behind her, the ballroom dissolved into chaos. Reporters shouting questions, grandmasters demanding to know who she'd studied under. Wealthy patrons suddenly eager to sponsor the girl they dismissed an hour earlier. But Emily heard none of it, because standing in the wings, barely visible in the shadows beyond the spotlight's reach, was a woman in a simple gray suit with kind eyes and a folder marked Augustine Home, Resident Files. And behind her, half hidden but unmistakable, was a boy with Emily's same dark hair and hollow cheeks, staring at her with an expression of disbelief that mirrored her own. Thomas, her brother, the one they'd said was adopted 3 years ago, the one she'd forced herself to stop asking about because hope hurt too much. But how was he here? And what did his presence mean for the second game she'd just won, and the life she thought she'd lost forever? My beautiful lovelies, I need to pause here and hear from you. This moment, this impossible reunion brewing in the shadows. Has your heart racing? Doesn't it? Tell me in the comments. Did you see this coming? Have you ever had someone you thought was lost forever walk back into your life? And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time to join our ducal family. Hit that subscribe button, because you don't want to miss what happens next. Emily's wooden chess set slipped from her hands and clattered against the marble floor, pieces scattering in directions that suddenly didn't matter. Thomas. The name came out broken, disbelieving. A question she'd stopped letting herself ask 3 years ago when Sister Margaret had sat her down with sad eyes and explained that her little brother had been placed with a good family upstate, and that sometimes loving someone meant letting them go to better opportunities. The boy stepped forward into the light, and Emily's heart fractured into 1,000 sharp pieces because it was him. Taller now, almost 9 years old, wearing clothes that actually fit and shoes that weren't held together with tape. But his eyes held the same haunted recognition, the same disbelief mirroring her own. Net? His voice was smaller than she remembered, uncertain, as if he couldn't trust what he was seeing either. The woman in the gray suit placed a gentle hand on Thomas's shoulder. My name is Margaret Ross. I'm a social worker with the State Family Services Division. Her voice carried the careful professionalism of someone delivering news that never landed gently. Thomas has been in foster care since you were separated. The adoption that was arranged, it fell through after 6 months. He's been in the system ever since. The words hit Emily like physical blows. Fell through. In the system. 6 months. That meant for 2.5 years. While she'd forced herself to imagine him happy and loved in some perfect home with parents who tucked him in at night and made him breakfast in the morning. He'd been trapped in the same machinery of temporary placements and broken promises that she'd endured. While she'd taught herself chess to survive the grief of losing him, He'd been surviving the same grief alone. Why? Emily's voice cracked. She tried again. Why didn't anyone tell me? Margaret Ross's expression held professional sympathy that didn't quite reach deep enough. You were in different districts. The files weren't cross-referenced properly. It wasn't until tonight, when your name started trending across every social media platform in the country, that someone in our office recognized you from Thomas's intake records. He'd mentioned a sister named Emily who loved chess. Behind them, the ballroom chaos continued. Reporters still shouting, cameras still rolling, Sutherland being ushered away by his publicist while avoiding every question about how it felt to lose to a child twice in one night. But that world felt distant now, separated from Emily by a chasm wider than the stage she'd just conquered. Thomas took another tentative step forward. I watched you, on the screen in the foster home. Everyone was watching, and I kept telling them, that's my sister, that's Nat. But nobody believed me because... He trailed off, but Emily understood the unfinished sentence. Because kids like us don't have sisters who beat billionaires at chess on national television. She dropped to her knees, ignoring the cold marble, ignoring the cameras that were definitely still filming this moment, ignoring everything except the brother she'd thought she'd lost forever. Come here. Thomas ran to her, and she caught him in an embrace that felt like reclaiming a piece of her soul she'd buried to survive its absence. He was solid and real and here, smelling like cheap laundry detergent and the peppermint candy someone must have given him, and she couldn't stop the tears that had been locked behind 5 years of forced strength. I looked for you, she whispered into his hair. Every day for a year. I asked Sister Margaret if there was news. I wrote letters they said they'd forward. I know, Thomas said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. Ms. Ross showed me some of them. They were in my file, but nobody gave them to me. The injustice of it, the casual cruelty of a system that separated siblings and then lost track of them like misplaced paperwork, made Emily's grief transform into something harder and colder. Rage would come later. Right now, she just needed to hold her brother and prove to both of them that this moment was real. Margaret Ross cleared her throat gently. Emily, I need to explain the situation. Thomas's current foster placement is not permanent. The family he's with is moving out of state next month and didn't petition to take him with them. He'll be reassigned to a new placement.
No.
The word came out flat and absolute. He comes with me, back to the Augustine home. Sister Margaret will take us both. It's not that simple. I just want $1 million for that home, Emily said, rising to her feet but keeping one hand locked around Thomas's. Enough to keep 42 kids fed and housed for 5 years. That makes me more than just another ward of the state. That makes me someone who's earned the right to stay with her brother. You're 12 years old, Margaret Ross said, not unkindly but with the immovable firmness of legal reality. You're still a minor yourself. You have no legal custody rights, no ability to petition for kinship placement. The most I can do is submit a request for sibling reunification, which could take months to process and depends entirely on bed availability at the Augustine home and months. Emily felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, victory turning to ash. You're saying I just beat one of the richest men in the country, proved I'm worth something to the world, earned enough money to save an entire orphanage, and I still don't have enough power to keep my own brother? The social worker's silence was answer enough. Thomas's hand tightened in hers, his voice small and terrified. I don't want to go back without you. The foster home, they're not mean, but they don't. Nobody there knows me. Nobody cares about the stuff I care about. I've been alone for so long. Nat, please don't let them take me away again. The desperation in his voice shattered something in Emily's chest. She'd survived poverty, separation, grief, and the constant erosion of dignity that came with being unwanted. She'd taught herself chess in the dark and turned pain into precision on a board where the rules at least made sense. But this, holding her brother while the system prepared to rip him away again simply because the paperwork said she wasn't old enough, rich enough, stable enough to be his family. This was a checkmate she couldn't calculate her way out of. The cameras were still filming. Somewhere nearby, reporters were probably narrating this heartbreak for their audiences with the appropriate sympathetic inflection. The story they'd come for tonight, Billionaire humbled by scrappy orphan, had just transformed into something rawer and more devastating. Chess prodigy wins everything except what matters most. Emily looked down at the scattered wooden chess pieces at her feet. The chipped queen, the leaning king, the pawns that had traveled with her through years of survival. They'd helped her win games, but they couldn't win this. Money couldn't win this. Genius couldn't win this. The world had spent all evening watching her prove she was extraordinary, but extraordinary didn't change the fact that she was still 12 years old and powerless against the machinery that decided which children deserved to stay together and which could be separated like cards shuffled into different decks. "When?" she asked quietly, the words scraping her throat. "When do you take him?" Margaret Ross checked her watch, and even that small gesture felt like a countdown timer on everything good that had happened in the last hour. "His foster parents are expecting him back tonight. I need to have him in the car within 30 minutes. 30 minutes. Less time than it took to play a chess game. Could Emily find one final move, one impossible strategy, to keep her brother from disappearing into the system's darkness again? Or had she won the battle only to lose the war? Emily stood frozen in that moment of absolute despair, feeling the injustice crush down on her shoulders like physical weight, until a voice cut through the chaos from behind her. 30 minutes is plenty of time. She turned to find Claire Pemberton striding across the stage with Victor Molina beside her, both grandmasters still wearing their commentary headsets as if they'd simply walked away mid-broadcast. Behind them trailed 3 reporters, 2 cameramen, and the event host looking simultaneously confused and captivated. "I'm sorry," Margaret Ross said with professional politeness masking annoyance, "but this is a private family services matter, which is currently being filmed by 40 cameras and streamed to 800,000 people worldwide." Claire interrupted, her voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who'd spent decades commanding attention at the highest levels of international chess. "Which means it stopped being private the moment you walked into frame. Now, I have a proposal, and you're going to listen to it because every word is being recorded." The social worker's jaw tightened, but she didn't walk away. Claire turned to Emily, her expression fierce and maternal in a way that reminded Emily achingly of her own mother, the one in the faded locket photo, the one who'd believed her daughter could be anything. "How long have you been playing chess?" 5 years, Emily answered, confused about where this was going. "Coaching? None. Just books and practice games. Computer analysis? Online study? Training camps? No. Nothing like that." Victor Molina stepped forward, his Russian accent thickening with emotion. "I have trained world champions. I have seen prodigies from Moscow to Mumbai. And what you displayed tonight, that level of positional understanding, tactical vision, endgame technique, is beyond what most adult players achieve in a lifetime. You didn't just beat Alexander Sutherland. You dismantled him with moves I will be analyzing for weeks." "What are you saying?" Thomas whispered, still pressed against Emily's side. Claire's eyes blazed with purpose. "I'm saying your sister isn't just good at chess. She's potentially world-class. The kind of talent that appears once in a generation. And I'll be damned if we let that talent, and the person behind it, get lost in bureaucratic shuffle because the system is too blind to recognize genius when it's standing barefoot on marble." She pulled out her phone, already dialing. "I'm calling 3 people right now. First, my lawyer, who specializes in family services and kinship placements. Second, the director of the Kasparov Foundation, which provides scholarships and support for chess prodigies from underprivileged backgrounds. Third, my own accountant, because I'm personally sponsoring Emily's chess education as of this moment. which means I have financial standing to petition as a mentor. You can't just... Margaret Ross started. I absolutely can, Claire shot back. And while my lawyer explains the legal precedents for emergency kinship preservation orders, when a minor demonstrates exceptional circumstances, let me explain something else. This girl just humiliated a billionaire on live television twice. She's viral right now, hashtags trending, news sites writing think pieces, social media exploding with support. If you separate these siblings tonight, you'll be doing it in front of the entire internet, and I promise you the outrage will be swift and sustained. Victor added quietly, you will become the face of a broken system, the person who took away a chess genius's only family on the night she proved herself to the world. Is that really how you want your name remembered? Margaret Ross's face cycled through frustration, calculation, and finally, reluctant acknowledgement. She wasn't cruel, just trapped in a system that rewarded following procedures over following hearts. But procedures could bend when enough pressure was applied. Even if I agreed to delay the transfer, she said carefully, I can't just place Thomas at the Augustine home without proper authorization and then authorize it. A new voice interrupted. Sister Margaret, the Sister Margaret from the Augustine home, pushed through the gathered crowd, slightly out of breath and clutching her old purse like a shield. Her gray habit was rumpled, her sensible shoes scuffed, but her eyes burned with the same fierce protectiveness Emily remembered from every night the nun had stretched their meager budget to make sure every child ate something. I've been watching from the monitor backstage, Sister Margaret said, addressing the social worker directly. The Augustine home has 2 open beds as of 3 days ago. I'll take both children tonight under emergency temporary placement, and we'll file the formal kinship reunification paperwork in the morning. These siblings have been separated for 3 years due to administrative failure. Let's not compound that failure with another traumatic separation when we have a viable alternative standing right here. Margaret Ross looked between the grandmasters, the nun, the cameras still recording every word, and the 2 children clinging to each other like shipwreck survivors. This is highly irregular, she said finally. Good, Claire Pemberton replied. The world needs more irregular. It needs more people willing to bend rules when the rules are failing children. The social worker pulled out her tablet, typed something with sharp, precise movements, then looked up with an expression that suggested she just made a decision that would generate mountains of paperwork. Fine. Emergency 72-hour placement at the Augustine home while formal reunification paperwork is processed. But Ms. Pemberton, if you're serious about this mentorship and sponsorship, I need documentation by Monday morning. You'll have it by Sunday night, Claire promised. Thomas made a sound between a sob and a laugh, his arms tightening around Emily. Does this mean? It means you're coming home with me, Emily whispered, hardly daring to believe it. For now, for 72 hours. And then we're going to fight like hell to make it permanent. Sister Margaret approached and gathered them both into a hug that smelled like lavender soap and institutional laundry detergent and home. The real kind, built not from perfect circumstances but from people who refused to give up on you. $1 million. The nun whispered against Emily's hair. Child, do you understand what you've done? You've saved us. Saved all of them. But Emily barely heard it, because Claire Pemberton was kneeling beside her now, looking at her with an intensity that felt like being truly seen for the first time. Tomorrow we start training properly, Claire said. Real coaching, tournament preparation, the World Championship circuit. But tonight, you go home with your brother and sleep in a real bed, and remember that genius means nothing if you lose your humanity in the pursuit of it. Victor Molina added, and when you are ready, when you have healed and trained and grown, you will show the world what you showed us tonight. That brilliance needs no permission. That talent recognizes no class boundaries. That sometimes the most extraordinary gifts come wrapped in the most ordinary circumstances. Could this fragile hope survive the harsh light of morning? Or had Emily finally found the one victory that mattered more than any game? The next 72 hours moved like a fever dream wrapped in bureaucratic reality. Sunday morning arrived with Claire Pemberton's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Diana Foster who specialized in family services law, sitting across from Margaret Ross in a sterile conference room at the state offices. Sister Margaret sat beside Emily and Thomas, her presence a quiet fortress of support while folders and forms multiplied across the table like invasive species. "The emergency placement holds," Diana stated, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd won harder battles. "But we're here to make it permanent." Kinship reunification between siblings who were improperly separated, with the Augustine home serving as their joint placement and Ms. Pemberton acting as educational sponsor and mentor. Margaret Ross reviewed the documents with the exhausted thoroughness of someone who'd spent the weekend fielding calls from her supervisors about why a routine foster transfer had exploded into a national news story. The chess match had been replayed on every major network. #JusticeForEmily was trending globally. 3 separate petitions demanding sibling reunification had collected over 1 million signatures combined. "The foundation is offering full scholarship coverage," Diana continued, sliding forward another document. "Education, training, tournament travel, all expenses. Ms. Pemberton has submitted to background checks and agreed to monthly progress reviews. The Augustine home has been inspected and approved for continued dual placement." What exactly is the barrier here? The social worker set down her pen with a sigh that contained multitudes. There isn't one. Not anymore. The reunification is approved pending final signatures. She looked at Emily with something between respect and exhaustion. "You fought for this harder than most adults would have. Your brother is lucky to have you." Thomas's hand found Emily's under the table, squeezing so tight it almost hurt. "When?" Emily asked, afraid to believe it. "Today. You both return to the Augustine home as permanent residents until aging out or alternative placement. Together." The word "together" landed like a benediction. By Monday afternoon, Sutherland's public dismantling was complete. His social media accounts had been flooded with thousands of comments dissecting his arrogance, his cruelty, his spectacular defeat. Think Pieces analyzed his downfall as a cautionary tale about privilege mistaking itself for merit. The charity organization that had hosted the Adoption Chess Challenge issued an apology and announced they were discontinuing the program entirely, acknowledging it had inadvertently commodified vulnerable children. But the true reckoning came that evening when Alexander Sutherland appeared, without publicist, without lawyers, without the armor of wealth, on the steps of the Augustine Home for Children. Sister Margaret answered the door, her expression wary. "I came to deliver the donation personally," he said, and his voice carried none of the showman's bravado from the stage. He looked diminished somehow, as if humiliation had physically compressed him. "The $1 million. For the home. I had my accountants wire it this morning, but I needed to come here." "Why?" Sister Margaret asked, and her tone suggested she'd throw him out if the answer wasn't satisfactory. Sutherland's jaw worked for a moment before words emerged. "Because I was wrong. Not just about Emily, about everything that night represented. I turned adoption into a game because I thought winning at games made me worthy of shaping lives. I mocked a child because her poverty made me feel superior. And when she proved herself brilliant, my first instinct was to accuse her of fraud rather than acknowledge that talent doesn't require my permission to exist." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This is an additional donation. $2 million. Unrestricted funding for the home, because $1 million shouldn't be the price of my conscience." Sister Margaret took the envelope with the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned that money often came with strings. "And what do you want in return?" "Nothing," Sutherland said quietly. "Except maybe the chance to tell Emily that she taught me more in 2 chess games than I learned in 30 years of winning. That she was right. I was afraid. Afraid that if someone without my advantages could be brilliant, it meant my advantages didn't make me special. That I was just ordinary." "You are ordinary," came Emily's voice from behind Sister Margaret. She stood in the doorway, Thomas beside her, both wearing clean clothes donated by church members who'd been following the story. She looked exactly like what she was, a 12-year-old girl who'd survived too much and was learning to hope again. "You're ordinary," she repeated, stepping forward. "And there's nothing wrong with ordinary. But you made it wrong by pretending your money made you better than people who had less. Chess doesn't care about your bank account. The board is the only place where everyone starts equal, 16 pieces, 64 squares, infinite possibilities. What you do with that equality reveals who you really are." Sutherland looked at her with something raw and undefended in his expression. "Who did I reveal myself to be?" "Someone afraid of losing his armor," Emily said. "But maybe also someone who could learn to be better. If you want to." He nodded slowly, and it looked like acceptance felt heavier than arrogance ever had. "I'm stepping back from public chess, from the exhibitions and the charity spectacles. I don't deserve to represent the game, but I'd like to, if it's appropriate, I'd like to fund a chess program here, at the Augustine home. Equipment, instruction, tournament entry fees. Not with my name attached, just because these kids deserve what I took for granted." Sister Margaret exchanged a glance with Emily, a silent conversation passing between them. "We'll accept the funding," the nun said finally, "but the program will be called the Emily Mercer Chess Initiative, because she's the one who earned it." For the first time since arriving, Sutherland smiled, and it was small and genuine and completely unlike the showman's grin he'd worn on stage. "Perfect." He left without asking for photos, without demanding gratitude, without trying to reclaim any piece of the narrative for himself. Just a man walking away from his own wreckage with the first honest step toward rebuilding something better. 6 months later, the Augustine home's common room had been transformed. 3 professional chess tables occupied the space where donated furniture used to crowd together. Proper tournament clocks sat beside each board. A bookshelf sagged with instruction manuals, tactic puzzles, and game collections. 12 children from the home had enrolled in the program, some because they loved chess, others because they loved the free snacks Sister Margaret provided during lessons, all because it gave them something that was theirs. Emily stood before her first chess class as a teacher, her worn wooden set displayed on the shelf behind her like a museum piece. Claire Pemberton sat in the back observing, having spent the past months coaching Emily to her first tournament victories, 3 first-place finishes in regional competitions, a rating that had climbed past 1900 and showed no signs of stopping. "Chess," Emily told the assembled children, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd learned truth the hardest way, "isn't about being smarter than your opponent. It's about being more patient, more disciplined, more willing to learn from every mistake. The board doesn't care where you came from or what you're wearing or whether you have a home that feels safe. It only cares about the moves you make." Thomas sat in the front row, his own rating climbing steadily, his smile more present than it had been in 3 years. "And sometimes," Emily continued, catching her brother's eye, "the most important move isn't the one that wins the game. It's the one that brings you home." Victory, she had learned, looked nothing like she'd imagined, but it felt like everything she'd needed. 2 years later, Emily Mercer stood in a different kind of spotlight, this one in Prague, in a tournament hall where silence held the reverence of cathedral space, where 200 of the world's best junior players had gathered for the World Youth Chess Championship. She was 14 now, taller but still carrying the same intensity in her eyes. Her rating had climbed to 2,247, just shy of candidate master with international master within reach. The wooden chess set from her childhood sat on the table beside her current game, a talisman she'd never stopped carrying even though she now played with precision tournament pieces. Her opponent across the board was a highly rated player from Moscow, 15 years old with a team of coaches watching from the audience. The game had reached the critical middle game, complex, balanced, demanding everything she'd learned from Claire's training, from thousands of online games, from studying Grandmaster tournaments late into the night while Thomas slept in the bed next to hers at the Augustine home. She found the winning move on her 33rd turn, a quiet bishop retreat that looked passive but created unstoppable threats 3 moves deep. Her opponent stared at the position for 8 minutes before extending his hand in resignation. Her 4th victory in 5 rounds. 2 more rounds remained, but she was tied for first place in her age category. In the audience, Claire Pemberton beamed with the pride of a teacher watching her students surpass expectations. Victor Molina sat beside her, keeping detailed notes for the training session they'd schedule after the tournament. Sister Margaret had traveled here with 5 other children from the Augustine Home program, giving them their first international trip and showing them that dreams could expand beyond the neighborhoods they'd been born into. And Thomas, almost 11 now, his own rating approaching 1600, watched his sister with the absolute certainty that she would achieve everything she set her mind to, because she'd already done the impossible once. She'd survived. She'd kept them together. She'd transformed pain into purpose on a board where the rules at least made sense. That evening, after the day's games concluded, Emily found a quiet courtyard behind the tournament venue where stone benches overlooked Prague's medieval skyline painted gold by sunset. She sat with her wooden set, running her fingers over the chipped queen and leaning king, remembering the girl who'd stood barefoot on marble 2 years ago with nothing but these pieces and a hope that felt more like desperation. "You know those pieces are famous now, right?" Claire's voice came from behind her. Emily smiled without turning. "Someone offered me $5,000 for them last month. A collector who'd seen them in the photographs from that night. And I told him they weren't for sale. Some things shouldn't be commodified." She paused, still touching the worn wood. "They remind me that I didn't win because I was talented. I won because I was desperate enough to turn survival into precision." Claire sat beside her, her presence warm and solid. "You won because you were brilliant. The desperation just focused it." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun paint the city in shades of amber and rose. "The Kasparov Foundation wants to feature your story in their next fundraising campaign," Claire said eventually. "Testimonials from scholarship recipients, the whole narrative arc. They think you could inspire donations that would fund programs for dozens of other kids like you." "Kids like me," Emily repeated softly. "Kids who learned chess in the dark because it was the only thing that made sense when nothing else did." "Yes." Emily considered it, weighing exposure against impact, privacy against purpose. "If I do it, I want to include something. Not just my story, everyone's story. Thomas, the other kids in our program, all the children who are still waiting in homes like Augustine was before Sutherland's donation. I want people to understand that I'm not special because I escaped. I'm just lucky that someone noticed before I disappeared entirely." "You're both," Claire said gently. "Special and lucky. And you're using both to pull others up behind you. That's what makes you remarkable." The final day of the tournament arrived with the weight of possibility. Emily needed a win in the last round to secure first place outright, to become the first player from her background to win this championship, to prove again that genius didn't require perfect circumstances, only opportunity and refusal to surrender. Her final opponent was from Germany, rated 50 points higher, playing a razor-sharp opening that led to positions Emily had studied until they lived in her bones. The game lasted 47 moves. Emily won. The tournament hall erupted, not with the nervous laughter of the charity gala audience, but with genuine appreciation from people who understood what they'd witnessed. Her competitors applauded because in chess, brilliance transcended rivalry. Her coaches embraced her because success earned through disciplined work was success that belonged truly to the person who'd achieved it. But the moment Emily would remember most came later, when she stood on the championship podium with the gold medal heavy around her neck and her wooden chess set tucked under her arm, and she looked into the audience to find Thomas on his feet, tears streaming down his face, applauding harder than anyone. They'd survived together. They'd fought together. And now they were winning together. Back home in the Augustine home 3 weeks later, Emily arranged the gold medal on the shelf beside her wooden pieces, creating a display that told a complete story. From desperation to discipline, from survival to victory, from the girl who'd learned chess in the dark to the champion who'd brought light back with her. The chess program she'd started now served 23 children. 3 had already qualified for regional competitions. One 10-year-old named Sophie showed promise that reminded Emily achingly of herself, hungry for the game in a way that transcended mere interest, like chess was the only language that translated pain into something manageable. Emily spent her evenings coaching Sophie now, passing forward the gift that Claire had given her, proving that opportunity multiplied when you refused to hoard it. On the wall behind the chess tables, someone had painted a quote in elegant script: "Genius doesn't need permission. It only needs a board and someone who refuses to give up." Below it, in smaller letters, Emily Mercer, World Youth Champion. Thomas walked into the room carrying homework and a chess magazine with his sister's photo on the cover. Her face serious and focused, the wooden pieces visible on the table beside her tournament board. "You're famous now," he teased gently. "I'm the same person I was before," Emily replied. But she smiled because it wasn't entirely true. She'd grown. She'd healed. She'd transformed survival skills into something that looked like thriving. "You're not the same," Thomas corrected, settling into the chair beside her. "You're better, because you proved that what happened to us didn't define us, that we could choose who we became instead of accepting who circumstances tried to make us." Emily looked at her brother, alive, present, safe here, and felt the kind of victory that transcended any championship. "Want to play?" she asked, gesturing to the board. "Always," Thomas replied, and as they began setting up the pieces, the worn wooden ones, not the tournament set, Emily understood with perfect clarity that this was what winning actually looked like. Not spotlights or medals or revenge against men who'd underestimated her, but this, a brother across the table, a home that held them both, a future that belonged to them because they'd refused to let the world's cruelty steal it. She moved her king's pawn forward 2 squares, the familiar opening that had started everything, and smiled at Thomas with the peace of someone who'd finally found her way home. "Your move," she said, and the game, the beautiful, infinite game, continued. "Tell me in the comments, which moment touched your heart the most? Was it the reunion with Thomas? The confrontation with Sutherland? The final championship victory? I want to hear what resonated with you, what made you believe that extraordinary things can bloom from ordinary soil when someone refuses to give up. Don't forget to join our ducal family by subscribing. Your support allows me to keep bringing you these stories of triumph over adversity, of love conquering systems designed to separate us, of the beautiful truth that we are all more powerful than the circumstances that try to define us.